welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here, as always, to bring some clarity to often complex sources, really delivering comprehensive, actionable knowledge straight to you, the listener. Today, we are diving deep into something called the Emotional Shifting Protocol for Unresolved Core Emotions. Now, this isn't your everyday stress management technique.
No, not at all.
This is a pretty specialized, structured approach. It's designed to identify and actually dissolve those really deep-seated emotional blocks, the stuff that's genuinely controlling behavior, often completely under the radar.
That's the crucial part, yeah. It's below conscious awareness. We're looking at a methodology developed over, well, several years, specifically for people whose lives and interactions are clearly being driven by, frankly, overwhelming, unresolved pain, suffering. And this pain, it usually traces back to past trauma, past victimization. So if you've seen patterns, maybe in yourself, maybe in someone close to you, patterns of manipulation, maybe anger that seems way out of proportion, constant defensiveness, or that kind of crippling anxiety, this protocol basically argues those are just symptoms. They're signs of a deeper, unmet emotional need or backlog.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to really cut through any potential confusion. We want to give you a full picture of how this protocol works, its mechanics, the safety rules, which are really important, and the kind of profound shift it promises.
We're aiming to give you that shortcut, essentially, a way to grasp this deep material efficiently.
And we're starting here because, well, understanding this root cause idea is potentially transformative, isn't it?
It really is. These emotional blocks, the protocol suggests, are the actual foundation for so many chronic problems, both personal and, in how we relate to others.
So we're talking things like constant fighting in relationships.
Exactly. Persistent conflict, yeah. But also that inability to get started on things, classic procrastination or chronic people-pleasing, always putting yourself last, and enabling behaviors, too, that whole cycle. The protocol tries to resolve that foundation. The idea is if you take away the root, the destructive behaviors just, they lose their fuel, their energy source is gone.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's explore the sort of immediate, tangible impact of carrying this emotional weight around. How does this unresolved energy actually show up day to day?
Well, the sources we looked at really emphasize that it reveals itself most intensely in those high-stakes relationships.
Like family, partners.
Yeah, exactly. Family, partners, even like your boss at work. Places where there's emotional investment. When one of these unresolved core emotions, maybe deep fear or grief, gets triggered, it often explodes outwards as blaming or getting stuck in these endless cyclical fights. Or sometimes it's more subtle, like complex emotional manipulation, often tangled up in guilt and shame cycles.
And it's important to say this isn't just about big dramatic blow-ups, is it? It can be much quieter, more insidious.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point. Think about chronic procrastination again. What's really going on there? Often it's a deep fear, maybe fear of failure, maybe even fear of success, which if you dig down often connects back to feeling unworthy, like self-loathing, or maybe feeling victimized by expectations in the past.
Okay.
Same with people-pleasing, right? That constant inability to say no or set boundaries, it's usually driven by this overwhelming fear of the emotional consequences, maybe triggering someone else's anger or feeling intense guilt themselves. And that guilt often masks that deeper stuff, like shame.
And the real kicker is the person doing this often genuinely believes they're just reacting to what's happening right now.
Precisely. They think you are making them angry or the situation is making them anxious. They don't realize they're actually reacting to this huge backlog of stored up fear or anger or guilt from years, maybe decades ago.
So the developer of this protocol talks about dissolving these core emotions, not just leading to feeling a bit better, but a fundamental change in capacity. They call it the freedom promise. What does that mean?
It's described as a really profound shift. The source material actually states that the individual, once the work is properly done and integrated, becomes effectively unable to stay in relationships that are defined by constant blame or manipulation.
Unable. That's a strong word.
It is. The idea is that the reactive part of the personality, the bit that constantly looks outside for the cause of its own feelings, the blaming part, it actually dissolves.
How?
Because the person becomes fully capable of taking ownership, real responsibility for their own emotional state. They develop this kind of immediate immunity to external emotional manipulation because the internal trigger, the old wound, the fuel source for that big reaction, it's just not there anymore.
So the promise is huge. Immunity to manipulation, no more blaming. Let's try and ground this in a really serious context where this lack of capacity is often painfully obvious. Addiction.
Mm.
Because the material draws a really critical link here, doesn't it? Between these unresolved emotions and addiction, especially the relapse cycle, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yes, the developer's background is key here. They worked as a drug counselor, and there's this powerful anecdote.
Yeah.
They noted that overwhelmingly, the number one reason clients gave for relapsing wasn't just random stress, it was always a relationship issue.
Always.
Consistently. It was never just, oh, I had a bad day. It was, my girlfriend's driving me nuts, or my mother's judging me again, or my partner cheated on me. That relationship dynamic was the most reliable trigger.
Why? What did it trigger?
It unleashed this absolute flood of incredibly difficult, often unbearable emotions, intense self-loathing, deep, deep guilt, paralyzing fear, sometimes just raw, unprocessed grief.
And because they just couldn't handle that intensity.
Yeah.
The substance was the go-to coping mechanism.
Exactly. It was the familiar escape route. The substance wasn't really the goal. Relief from that internal hurricane was the goal.
Right.
So the logic of the protocol is, if you dissolve that root emotion, you take away the power of the trigger. The relationship friction might still happen, sure, but the emotional reaction isn't a Category 5 hurricane anymore. It's maybe, a Category 1 shower. It's manageable.
Manageable without needing the substance to numb it out.
That's the idea. It reduces the desperation.
Okay, but we absolutely have to be clear here about what this protocol is not, especially around addiction and mental health. This is crucial for setting expectations for anyone listening. Is this presented as some kind of substitute for proper clinical care?
No, absolutely, categorically not. The protocol developer is very, very clear on this. It is not a miracle cure for addiction or alcoholism.
Okay.
While it aims to resolve the emotional energy that fuels addictive behavior and that can make the personality softer, less desperate, less constantly on edge, it doesn't, by itself, stabilize a life that's been structured around addiction for years.
So the person still needs serious external support.
Absolutely. Comprehensive support. The sources are specific. Consistent engagement with support groups like 12-step programs or others, professional mental health check-ins are vital. And critically, addressing any underlying neurochemical imbalances.
Through things like supplements or medication.
Yes, potentially supplements, maybe prescription medication, specific nutritional changes, whatever is needed to help stabilize the brain chemistry after potentially years of substance abuse messing with it.
So the protocol helps with the emotional backlog, softens the personality.
Right. It removes a lot of the internal drama, the reason for the desperation.
But it doesn't magically fix brain chemistry overnight.
Exactly. That takes time and dedicated work. The protocol takes away the intense emotional fuel for the fire, but the physical and mental rebuilding still requires time, attention, and external resources.
So it gives the person emotional leverage, maybe makes sobriety feel more possible, less like a constant white-knuckle fight.
Yeah, maybe less dramatic and mad and depressed, as the source puts it.
But they still have to do the hard yards of recovery, rebuilding brain health, life skills, all that foundational stuff.
Think of it like this. The protocol might fix the internal emotional engine that was constantly overheating and breaking down, but the car still needs new tires, maybe an oil change, definitely fuel, and crucially, a driver who learns and follows the rules of the road for sobriety.
That's a good analogy. The capacity for peace might be restored internally, but the commitment to long-term stabilization, the structure, has to follow.
Absolutely.
That need for structure and careful approach leads us right into the groundwork required. Preparation, safety, and also the recommended way to approach helping others with this. The developer strongly emphasizes attraction rather than promotion. What does that mean in practice, especially if you're worried about a loved one?
The guidance here is really firm and maybe counterintuitive for some people. If you want to help a loved one who you think needs this kind of deep emotional work, the single most effective thing you can do is learn the protocol and do it thoroughly on yourself first.
Yourself first. Why? Why is that embodiment piece so much more powerful than just, telling them about it or sending them the link?
Because it's primarily an energetic shift, not just an intellectual one. And that energetic shift is far more subtle and ultimately more effective than trying to persuade someone verbally.
How does that work?
Well, once the person who has genuinely done this deep work, start moving through the world with this transformed, calmer presence, the Calm is palpable. People feel it.
Hmm.
Your loved one, the one you're concerned about, will naturally notice the change in you. They might eventually say something like, wow, you used to totally freak out when I did X, but now you're just calm. What happened? What did you do?
And that's the opening.
That's the attraction. Curiosity born from seeing a real change, trying to promote the protocol, pushing it on them, sending articles, demanding they change almost always triggers resistance. It's human nature.
Yeah.
Attraction lowers those defenses naturally.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about the absolute prerequisites for someone actually starting this work. The sources lay out 4 core safety requirements. They call them the 4 S's. These have to be in place. Let's break down the first 2. Safety and stability.
Right. Number 1, safety. This is non-negotiable, absolutely foundational. The person undergoing the protocol must feel total, unwavering trust in the person guiding them.
What does that trust look like?
It means knowing, deep down, without a shred of doubt, that the guide is acting purely in their best interest, that the guide will follow up consistently afterwards, which we'll get to, and really importantly, that the guide has done this deep emotional work themselves. They have to embody that piece.
And if that trust isn't there?
If it's not there, the client stays clinched. That's the term the developer uses. They're skeptical, guarded, closed off energetically. Their survival mechanisms are firing on all cylinders.
And you can't relax if you're clinched.
Exactly. The deep relaxation needed for the protocol is impossible. They'll keep interrupting, asking questions driven by fear or skepticism, and you just can't get to the necessary depth. It sabotages the process before it starts.
Okay, that's safety. The second S is stability. This sounds like it goes beyond just feeling calm in the moment. It's about being mentally and emotionally grounded.
Precisely. You cannot effectively do this work with someone who is in an active psychotic state.
Defined as?
Defined as not being grounded in objective reality. Maybe experiencing significant paranoia or exhibiting severely scattered, disorganized thinking. The developer mentioned examples, like clients who literally couldn't hold a single thought for more than, say, 20 seconds before jumping to something completely unrelated. They need the capacity to focus their attention. And beyond psychosis, they need a baseline of emotional stability. We're generally avoiding trying this during states characterized by a constant, extreme emotional roller coaster. The source mentions severe, untreated borderline personality characteristics as an example where caution is needed. They need at least a few days of relative grounding and stability, not minute-to-minute emotional whiplash, for the work to actually land and integrate.
What about something mentioned in the source, demand avoidance? How does that fit in if someone seems stable but just resists everything you suggest?
Demand avoidance. Yeah, that's often a really deep, ingrained trauma response. The person feels compelled to resist any perceived attempt to control them, even if the instruction is totally benign, like take a deep breath.
So they tense up if you say, relax.
Exactly. It's a hallmark of instability rooted in deep past trauma, often around control. The protocol actually addresses this by requiring flexibility from the guide. If the client literally can't follow a simple direction, the guide needs to shift, maybe ask them to choose their own calming activity instead, giving them back a sense of agency.
But the underlying instability still needs to be managed first.
Yes. The core instability, if it's severe, generally needs to be addressed or stabilized before you can safely attempt the deepest layers of this emotional work.
Okay, safety and stability. Let's move to the third S, self-motivation. This sounds like it's more than just agreeing to do the session. It's about a genuine internal desire to let go of the pain.
It has to be. The motivation absolutely must come from a place of often deep desperation for relief, not because someone else is pushing them or because they feel they should. External coercion just doesn't work here.
Is there an example of this?
Yeah, the developer shared a really striking anecdote. They were talking with a friend about politics, and the friend was expressing intense anger and anxiety about the other side. When the developer gently asked if they'd like to resolve that intense anger and fear, the friend flatly refused.
Refused.
Because for them, the anger and fear felt essential. It was part of their identity, part of their political engagement. They believed they needed it. If someone chooses to hold on to the anger or fear, if that emotion serves some purpose for them, maybe it feels protective, maybe it validates their worldview, the protocol simply won't work. You can't force release.
So what's the right motivational space?
Often, it's a place of profound suffering and desperation. The source used the example of a parent watching their child consumed by addiction, feeling so desperate they'd be willing to take the addiction on themselves if they could. That level of deep, gut-wrenching desire for freedom from suffering, that's the essential ingredient. The person has to truly want to change, to let go.
Okay. And the fourth S, which you mentioned might be a big practical hurdle, especially for those struggling with substances, sobriety.
Yes, intoxication is a major process blocker, particularly with sedatives. Things like alcohol or benzodiazepines, Xanax, Valium, that class of drug, they literally blunt feelings.
Chemically.
Yes, chemically. They physically slow down or even shut off electrical activity in the parts of the brain responsible for processing emotion, for insight, for accessing these deeper states. The source material actually references studies suggesting it can take up to 1 full year of complete abstinence from heavy sedative use for the brain to fully turn back on, neurochemically speaking, and restore its full capacity.
A whole year. Wow.
Now, some positive effects from the protocol might still be possible after, say, 2 months of sobriety, but the guide must be aware of these chemical limitations. The depth you can reach might be constrained.
And it's not just illicit drugs or alcohol.
No, even commonly used over-the-counter sleeping aids can interfere. Things like Dramamine or Benadryl used for sleep. They can make the client too drowsy, too foggy to properly engage with the deep, focused, meditative state the protocol requires.
So basically, the brain chemistry itself needs a chance to heal and rebalance before the energetic shift of the protocol can fully take root and be effective.
Precisely. If your system is chemically anesthetized, you simply cannot access the full intensity of the root emotion you're trying to resolve, and you certainly can't experientially feel the presence of peace in the way the protocol demands.
Got it. Safety, stability, self-motivation, sobriety. Beyond these four S's, there was one final element the developer felt was so incredibly crucial that they actually refused to certify external coaches because they couldn't guarantee it would happen. That was the need for consistent follow-up. Why was follow-up seen as just as important as the session itself?
Because the shift achieved during the session is primarily energetic and emotional. But the integration of that shift into daily life is psychological and behavioral. It needs reinforcement.
So the session plants the seed, but the follow-up helps it grow.
That's a great way to put it. Clients consistently reported that the ongoing check-ins were absolutely vital. They helped ensure the person didn't just have a peak experience, but actually integrated the shift, learned to maintain that state of peace amidst the triggers of everyday life.
And the developer's reluctance to certify others.
It stemmed directly from a lack of trust that independent professionals operating on their own would actually provide the necessary consistency and duration of follow-up support that was deemed essential. They saw it as a core part of the protocol, not an optional extra.
It sounds like they viewed follow-up almost as a risk management strategy.
Oh.
What specific risks were they worried about? And how could a loved one, providing that follow-up, uniquely mitigate those risks?
The main risk is essentially recidivism, slipping back into the old, familiar emotional and behavioral patterns, simply because the new state of peace feels, well, unfamiliar, maybe even vulnerable initially.
Right, the old way is known, even if it's painful.
Exactly. And think about the typical therapy model.
Mm.
Maybe an hour a week. A parent, a partner, someone who is consistently present in the person's life, is uniquely positioned to offer that steady, long-term, non-judgmental reinforcement. And when you, the loved one providing the support, are embodying your own peace because you did your work first, you create what the developer calls a wider emotional container.
Okay, let's explore that phrase, wider emotional container. What does that look like in practice? How do you create that space?
When the loved ones say you has done their own deep emotional work, you stop being so emotionally reactive yourself. You don't immediately clamp down on the other person with your own fear or anxiety or need to control the situation when they express difficulty.
So you stay calm even when they're struggling.
Yes. Your calm presence creates a safe space. It gives the person who's working through their issues the room and the safety they desperately need to process their own stuff, including those really deep generational patterns we talked about. They start to realize they can actually talk about difficult feelings or even express some residual pain or frustration without you panicking or taking it personally or shutting them down.
And that improves communication.
Drastically. They feel safer calling you, talking more honestly, because they sense that your container is wide enough, strong enough to hold their struggle without collapsing or retaliating.
Okay, so the groundwork is laid. Safety, stability, motivation, sobriety, and that crucial follow-up container. Now let's move into the actual roadmap of the protocol itself. How do we find the specific emotional block that needs resolving?
Well, the protocol's core mechanics are described as elegantly simple, though not necessarily easy to execute, basically. Identify the block, relax the body deeply, bring up the feeling of peace experientially, and then use that peace to meet and dissolve the difficult emotion.
Simple, but not easy.
Okay, but the real skill, initially, lies in correctly identifying what block to work on, and that absolutely begins with getting specific, really specific.
Meaning we can't just work on general anxiety or
Yeah.
feeling angry.
No, absolutely not. You need a specific example, a concrete scenario where the target emotion comes up the strongest.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, like whenever I even think about applying for a new job, I feel this pit of dread, specifically because my last boss publicly humiliated me. Or when my mother sends me that specific kind of text message criticizing my lifestyle, I feel instant boiling rage. It needs that level of detail.
And why is that specificity so mandatory? Why not just work on the general feeling?
Because the entire protocol is based on testing the result. How do you know if the energetic shift actually worked?
You go back to the specific scenario.
Exactly. Immediately after the main process, you revisit that precise example in your mind. The client needs to be able to report that thinking about it now feels significantly better or calmer. The charge needs to be noticeably reduced.
Even if it's not completely gone.
Right. Sometimes a tiny bit of tension might remain, and interestingly, the developer noted some of the biggest life changes happened in people who did report some residual tension, not necessarily zero. But the overwhelming emotional intensity, the grip of the feeling, must be profoundly lessened. Without the specific example, you have no reliable benchmark.
Makes sense. But as you said earlier, the initial feeling identified the anxiety about the job, the rage at the text. That's usually just the surface, right?
Almost always, yes. That's the presenting emotion. The guide's real job, the deeper skill, is to gently probe beneath that surface to find the core emotion, what the source calls the taproot of the whole problem.
And this is where the protocol offers that big advantage.
Yeah.
The claim that the destination, that taproot, is always known. It will invariably be one of just 5 core emotions.
That's the assertion, based on years of application. It provides immense confidence for the guide. Let's list these 5 foundational emotional roots, as the protocol defines them.
Okay.
Number 1, self-loathing. This often shows up indirectly, maybe through persistent feelings of unworthiness or chronic guilt or deep shame. Think back to the people pleaser driven by fear of guilt. That guilt is often just masking a deeper core belief of, I am fundamentally flawed or I am bad. That's self-loathing.
Got it. Number 2.
Number 2, unresolved grief. This is perhaps more straightforward. It relates to loss, deep sadness that hasn't been fully felt and processed. Could be the loss of a person, sure, but also maybe a job, a dream, an identity, even a future you expected.
Okay. 3.
Number 3, life is meaningless. Now, this is distinct from just sadness or grief. It's described as a profound sense of being hollowed out, an existential void, often follows a major loss. But the core feeling is less about sadness and more about nothing matters anymore, or I feel completely empty inside.
A kind of existential despair. Okay, number 4.
4 is victimization or feeling traumatized. This connects to past experiences that were emotionally overwhelming, where the person felt powerless and unable to process or express the pain at the time, so the energy got stuck.
Examples being?
The developer mentioned things like being publicly shamed or humiliated in school in front of peers, or maybe intense parental pressure that crushed a child's natural vulnerability, forcing them into a role they weren't equipped for. The core feeling here is, something was done to me that I couldn't handle, and it damaged me, and maybe that defines me now.
Right. And the 5th one?
The 5th is primal fear. This isn't necessarily fear of something specific happening now, but more an overriding, generalized, constant state of tension, hypervigilance, or edginess.
Like always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. The source gave that powerful example of the client whose father was never physically violent but had such an explosive, unpredictable temper that she lived her entire childhood in a state of constant low-grade terror, a pervasive, unprocessed fear that something awful was perpetually imminent.
Wow. Self-loathing, grief, meaningless, victimization, primal fear. What seems fascinating is the guide's confidence, knowing it has to be one of these 5. Given how complex trauma seems, why only these 5? Did the sources explain why other really powerful emotions like intense rage or jealousy or envy aren't on that primary list?
That's a really perceptive question. The developer's experience, as reported, suggests that those other powerful emotions, rage, envy, jealousy, are almost always secondary expressions. They're like branches growing from one of the 5 main roots.
So rage isn't a root itself.
Rarely, according to this model. Chronic rage, for example, is often seen as a desperate defense against feeling the deeper pain of victimization or maybe profound self-loathing. Envy might stem from feeling meaningless or lacking inherent worth, which again points back to self-loathing. These 5 are identified as the fundamental emotional energy fields that tend to get suppressed and trapped when the human system is overwhelmed by trauma or loss. So the guide isn't confused because they trust that if they dig deep enough, gently enough, they will hit one of these 5 bedrock emotions.
What if the client is really stuck? They feel something deep, but they can't tell if it's, say, grief or self-loathing. What does the guide do then?
This is where the experiential nature of the protocol comes in, along with what the developer termed trusting God's grace, or intuition arising within the process. Because it's about feeling, not just talking, the guide can gently suggest exploring one path.
Like, let's see if it feels like grief.
Exactly. Let's gently bring up the piece and see if what wants to surface feels like grief. If that is the taproot needing attention, the client will likely experience a noticeable emotional release, a connection. If the guide suggests the wrong one, say, they suggest grief, but it's actually self-loathing, the client simply won't connect with it emotionally in the same way. The feeling won't resonate or intensify.
So you test it experientially.
Yes. This confidence in the process, knowing you'll eventually find the right route, allows the guide to lead without the kind of hesitation or intellectual confusion that can sometimes stall traditional talk therapy. You trust the process to reveal what needs healing.
And before we move fully into the mechanism of healing with peace, let's quickly touch on generational trauma again.
Yeah.
You mentioned if someone says they've always felt this way, like since earliest childhood, and they can't link it to a specific event in their own life, that's the key indicator.
It's considered the primary indicator, yes. When a feeling may be profound, unexplained sadness, or that deep self-loathing seems to have been present from the very beginning, with no identifiable personal trigger event, it strongly suggests the emotional charge wasn't originally theirs.
It was inherited.
Inherited or absorbed, yes. The idea is the emotional energy belonged to a parent or grandparent, maybe even further back, and it was passed down, perhaps even energetically in utero or through early childhood dynamics. Understanding this is huge for the client.
Why?
Because it reframes their entire internal struggle. Suddenly, they realize they might not be fighting against some fundamental flaw or mistake in themselves. They might actually be processing and potentially releasing something inherited. It can lift an enormous burden of shame.
Okay, so the core emotion is identified whether personal or potentially generational. Now we get to the absolute heart of the protocol, the mechanism of the shift. How does this presence of peace actually dissolve such a deeply entrenched emotional blocks?
Okay, first, the whole protocol rests on a holistic premise. Body and mind are never truly separate. These unresolved emotions aren't just abstract ideas. They are physically held, stored as energy in the body.
You mentioned throat tension earlier.
Right. Someone who consistently swallowed their words, couldn't speak up in a controlling relationship, might literally hold chronic tension in their throat muscles. Someone who felt crushed by responsibility might carry that weight of the world as physical tension in their shoulders and upper back. The physical sensation is actually proof that the emotion is unresolved energy trapped in the body's tissues.
So the initial step of relaxation, the meditation, is about softening those physical holding patterns first.
Exactly. You need to soften the container before you can work with the contents. Techniques like the 4-4-8 breath, inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 8, are common starting points. But again, remember demand avoidance. If the client resists direct instruction, the guide needs to be flexible, maybe ask them to simply choose their own way to relax, whatever feels calming to them. The goal is physiological relaxation as the gateway to the deeper energetic work.
Okay, body relaxed. Then the guide works to help the person access the presence of peace. The sources are really emphatic about this.
Yeah.
It cannot be just an idea or a nice thought. It has to be felt experientially.
Absolutely critical distinction. This piece isn't a concept. It's described as the actual energetic presence of existence itself. Some might call it God energy, universal consciousness. The field of being, the label, doesn't matter as much as the direct feeling of it. It's not a memory of peace or thought about peace. It is the raw, palpable energy of being.
And the developer offers 2 main ways to access that directly.
Yes, 2 distinct methods are outlined.
Walk us through those. What's method A?
Method A is the direct inquiry. It's very direct. The guide asks the client to genuinely try, right here, right now, not to exist, just try it.
Okay.
When the client actually makes that sincere mental attempt, what do they immediately encounter?
The fact that they do exist.
Exactly. They bump right up against the undeniable, unavoidable reality of their own presence, their own awareness, that fundamental sense of I am, which is inherently calm, still, and present beneath all the mental noise. That presence is the peace. It's a spontaneous recognition, not a thought.
Wow. Okay. That's quite direct. What if that's too abstract for someone? What's method B?
Method B uses an image as a bridge. If the direct inquiry feels too conceptual, the guide might start with a visualization, maybe a beautiful serene beach, a calm mountain lake, fluffy clouds, maybe even petting a beloved animal. The instruction is key. Don't just see the image, feel the peace that the image evokes. Really tune into the feeling of stillness, silence, presence associated with it. Then, once that feeling is established, the crucial step, the guide says, okay, now gently let the image dissolve, but keep the feeling.
So the feeling has to remain even when the mental picture is gone.
Precisely. If the peaceful feeling disappears when the image fades, they haven't accessed the actual experiential peace itself. They were just attached to a comforting thought or memory. The presence must remain independent of the image. That distinction is vital for the protocol to work.
So let's say they access that flicker of presence, that experiential piece, using one of these methods. How do you then help them deepen it, make it feel more solid, more like a resource they can use?
Right, the focus shifts from just accessing it to actually immersing attention in it, deepening the experience.
Yeah.
The guide uses several powerful attention-focusing cues.
Like what?
One really interesting example is asking the client quite directly, this peace you're feeling right now, when will it end?
How does that help?
Well, intellectually, the mind might jump to, oh, when the session ends or when I get stressed again. But the question forces an immediate experiential check-in with the feeling itself right now. And in the direct experience of the moment, the peace just is. It feels continuous. It reinforces its presence. Another technique involves auditory focus, asking them to listen for the silence underneath any sounds or the silence within the piece itself. This pulls attention away from the busy thinking mind.
And the source mentioned using analogies to help guide them deeper, like going deeper into the ocean.
Yes, exactly. That deeper into the ocean analogy is a common one, often borrowed from hypnotherapy techniques. The guide might lead them through multiple levels, going deeper now, letting the piece become even more solid, feeling it expand, noticing it flowing through your body. The goal is to shift the piece from being just a small point of focus to becoming a pervasive, ambient awareness that saturates their entire sense of being.
Okay, so the piece is deepened, it feels solid, flowing. Now comes what sounds like the ultimate step, the real breakthrough moment, anchoring the individual in the realization that they are the piece.
This is it. This is the core identity shift the protocol aims for. The guide might start by gently reminding the client again, notice how your thoughts come and go. Notice how feelings arise and pass away. They are transient. But the core sense of you, the awareness that notices the thoughts and feelings, that remains. Then comes the pivotal inquiry, often phrased something like this. Feel the energetic presence of you right now. Now feel the energetic presence of the piece you've accessed. Are these two separate energies? Or are they, in fact, the very same presence?
And the realization is.
The realization, when it truly lands, not just as an idea, but as a felt sense, is they are the same. The energy of me is the energy of the piece. I am this presence.
What actually happens, psychologically or energetically, when that clicks? The source material mentioned several anecdotes where the difficult emotion just evaporated instantly at this point. Why would that happen?
When the person has that direct realization, oh my gosh, I am the piece, their fundamental sense of self shifts dramatically. Think about it. The old, painful emotion, the self-loathing, the fear, the grief it was fundamentally attached to and experienced by a limited, contracted sense of self. A self identified solely with the body and mind, feeling separate, vulnerable, constantly needing to defend itself.
Right, a small self.
Exactly. When the individual realizes, even for a moment, that their true identity, their core self, isn't confined to that small, vulnerable package, but is actually this vast, universal, peaceful presence. The energetic boundary that was holding the old emotion just collapses.
Because the container disappears.
In a sense, yes. The emotion that was trapped inside the perceived boundary of the limited self suddenly has no vessel, no anchor point. It dissolves instantly into the infinite space of the piece because it can no longer be contained or defined by that fixed, vulnerable, separate identity. The identity itself expanded beyond the problem.
And the developer connected this seemingly spiritual insight to ideas emerging from modern science, like quantum physics.
Yes, it's a really fascinating point of convergence mentioned in the material. The developer apparently had discussions with a quantum physicist who explained that, from a physics perspective, consciousness was never actually located solely within the physical brain or body anyway. Awareness, energy, it's fundamentally non-local, it's everywhere.
So the physics perspective aligns with the experiential realization.
It seems to. While the physicist was likely talking about electrons, fields, and the nature of reality at a subatomic level, the core insight aligns beautifully. The fundamental you is not limited to the skin. It's connected to, or is, the universal presence. Now, obviously, the client isn't expected to maintain that state of cosmic consciousness 2027. The practical, survival-oriented mind still needs to function day to day.
Of course.
But that momentary, profound recognition of their true nature as the piece is the energetic catalyst. It's what completely pulls the rug out from under the old emotional block, freeing up all the energy that was trapped holding it in place.
Okay, so just to recap the core functional steps for the listener, identify the deep root emotion. Relax the body. Experientially bring up and deepen the feeling of peace. Then, allow the difficult emotion to arise within that peace, feeling it fully without resistance. And crucially, ignore the mind when it tries to jump back into the story of the trauma.
Exactly. You ignore the ruminating mind. This is pure energy shifting. It's not talk therapy in the traditional sense. Therapy often involves talking about the trauma. This is about directly feeling and dissolving the energetic residue of the emotion by introducing and merging it with the higher frequency, the undeniable presence of peace.
So wrapping this all up, what does this very intensive, quite nuanced work ultimately mean for you, the listener? Especially if you recognize some of these patterns, maybe in yourself, or perhaps you have a loved one whose destructive behaviors are really impacting your life right now.
Well, the final, very practical directive from the developer, woven throughout the material, is probably the most important single takeaway for anyone wanting to help someone else. You have to do the work on yourself first, period.
Embody the peace yourself.
Yes. You must genuinely embody that peace, because when you do that consistently, you naturally create that wider, calmer, non-reactive emotional container we talked about. Your sustained calm presence is, paradoxically, the most powerful and necessary condition you can offer to allow your loved one to finally feel safe enough to even begin working through their own deeply embedded stuff, their personal pain, their generational trauma. Your peace becomes their safe harbor. It is statistically and energetically the most effective tool you actually possess to facilitate their healing.
And that leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider. Building on that idea of attraction, not promotion. Even after you personally have done this work, maybe even mastered the protocol and feel ready, capable of guiding your loved one through it. Consider the possibility that the universe or God, or simply the natural unfolding of things might require you to simply wait. Maybe even up to a year, as the source suggests.
Wait. Why wait if you can help?
Because they might need that extended period of time. They might need the sustained, unwavering space created solely by your consistent peace, your non-reactivity, to finally feel secure enough to allow their own deeply buried generational trauma to surface and begin to resolve organically within the safety of your calm presence. Your ongoing peace isn't just about your wellness. It might be the essential patient catalyst their system needs to finally begin its own healing journey. Your peace creates the weather for their growth.